The bookstore smelled of dust, paper, and endings. She thought the night would close with silence, keys turning, lights dimming. But then came the knock, firm, unexpected, impossible. On the other side stood a man whose face graced magazines and whose empire touched cities. He didn't want profits or signatures. He asked for something stranger, softer, riskier, one last story. What happens when a weary bookstore clerk and a billionaire CEO collide at midnight? One desperate to hold on, the other desperate to forget. Their stories weren't meant to meet, until they did. Hi, my beautiful story family. I've missed you all so much, and it feels wonderful to be here with you again today. Every time we gather for a new story, it reminds me why this family is so special, your love, your support, and the way you share this journey with me. If you're ready for today's emotional story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far our story family stretches across the world. And remember, tomorrow, I'll be bringing you another story just as powerful as this one. You don't want to miss it. Now, let's dive into today's story. The little bell above the door had long since stilled. The bookstore shelves leaned like tired sentinels, heavy with forgotten worlds and waiting whispers. Amelia Hart brushed her hands across a stack of books on the counter, the paper edges rough against her fingertips. She sighed. Another day of nearly no sales, another day of telling herself this place still mattered. The clock above the entrance ticked toward midnight, steady and merciless. The shop wasn't just a business to Amelia, it was her inheritance, the only piece left of her father, a man who had believed stories could keep people alive. Now, she wondered if her belief was too fragile, too foolish. Rent notices piled like guilt in the drawer she refused to open. Outside, the city had already dimmed. Most storefronts went dark hours ago, but she lingered, letting the soft lamplight cast golden threads across spines that no one touched. She tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear and whispered to herself, just a little longer. She always stayed longer, as though time might answer. Miles away, but not truly far, the world of neon, glass, and steel thrived. Ethan Royce sat alone in his office, the top floor of a skyscraper that pierced the night sky. He was young for a CEO, 35, and already carried the weight of billions. His empire stretched across industries, tech, logistics, real estate. On paper, he was untouchable. Yet here he was, staring at a blank screen instead of closing another deal. His assistant had begged him to go home. He hadn't listened. What people didn't see was the silence he came home to, the way his penthouse echoed back at him like a cavern. His father had built the company on merciless rules. Ethan had inherited not just the fortune, but also the loneliness. Tonight, he couldn't shake the emptiness. He needed something. Not champagne, not another meeting, not another hollow victory. Something slower, quieter. Something real. When he left the office, his driver was startled. "Where to, sir?" Ethan only murmured, "Just drive." He leaned back, eyes tracing the city lights bleeding into the dark, searching for something he didn't yet have words for. By chance or fate, the car rolled down a narrow street. That's when he saw it. A small bookstore, lights still glowing, defiant against the midnight. The window held a display of worn classics and hand-scribbled notes recommending them. Something about it arrested him. He told the driver to stop. Inside, Amelia reached for the light switch. The shop creaked like it too was ready to rest. Then, a knock. Sharp. Insistent. She froze, her hand hovering over the switch. Who would come at this hour? Her first thought was trouble. Her second thought was maybe, just maybe, a sale. Gathering her breath, she opened the door an inch. And there he was. Ethan Royce, though she didn't yet know his name. He looked nothing like the ruthless titan from financial magazines. His coat was undone, his eyes tired, almost pleading. He leaned slightly, as though the weight of his own life pressed too hard on his shoulders. "Sorry to bother you," he said, voice deep but edged with something fragile. "But, would you tell me one last story?" The words hung in the air, absurd and impossible. Amelia blinked, half expecting a camera crew to jump out, some prank unveiled. "I what?" she stammered. He gave the faintest smile, the kind of smile that knew it was asking too much. "I saw your light on. I don't want to buy a book. I just want to hear one." The city's cold wind slipped past him into the shop. Amelia hesitated, searching his face, wondering what kind of man knocked on a bookstore door at midnight to ask for something so strange. She should have said no. She should have closed the door. Instead, she found herself stepping aside. "Come in," she whispered. The door chimed again as it closed behind him, sealing the start of something neither of them could yet name. If you've ever felt that pull, the unexpected knock, the moment that could change everything, stick with this story. Because sometimes, the last chapter is only the beginning. The shop door clicked shut, muffling the city's noise until only the low hum of the old heater and the faint tick of the wall clock remained. Amelia stood with her arms crossed, not defensive exactly, but uncertain, like someone trying to anchor herself in a room that suddenly felt smaller. Ethan didn't move right away. He glanced around, his gaze drinking in the shelves lined with books worn by countless hands. There was reverence in the way he looked at them, though his tailored coat and expensive watch clashed with the humble warmth of the store. "You really want a story?" she asked, her voice carrying equal parts disbelief and challenge. He nodded slowly. "Yes. One last story before I go back." He didn't explain what back meant. His life, his empire, his silence, it hung unspoken in the air. Amelia's brow furrowed. Strangers sometimes came in asking for directions, or for rare books she couldn't afford to stock, but never this. "I'm not a storyteller. I just sell the books," she muttered. "Then choose one," he said softly. "Read it to me." His tone wasn't commanding, not the clipped efficiency of a CEO giving orders. It was closer to pleading, as though the words themselves carried weight he couldn't hold alone. Something in his eyes stopped her from refusing. They weren't cold, as she expected from someone of his status. They were tired, deeply so, as though he'd been wandering for too long without rest. Against her better judgment, she reached behind the counter, pulled out a slim novel with a cracked spine, and opened it. Her voice wavered at first, then steadied. The story was simple: a boy in a small town who dreamed of crossing the ocean, who believed there was more than the horizon his neighbors accepted. She read aloud, the rhythm of the words filling the quiet shop. Ethan sat down in one of the mismatched armchairs near the front window, his tall frame folding into the seat with surprising ease. He listened, really listened, as though each word were pulling him closer to something he'd forgotten. His shoulders, perpetually squared by habit, began to drop. Amelia's throat tightened as she read. She hadn't expected to feel anything herself, but the boy's yearning echoed her own, the desire for something larger than the smallness she felt trapped in, the fear of letting go of what little she had. She found herself softening toward this stranger who sat so still, as if afraid to break the spell. When she paused for breath, Ethan whispered, "Don't stop." So she continued. The heater rattled. Outside, snow had begun to fall, flakes drifting past the fogged window, but inside the world condensed into her voice, the story, and the man leaning forward, elbows on knees, like a child hearing a tale for the first time. Then came the line, the one that struck too close. The boy realized he wasn't afraid of the ocean, she read, her voice almost breaking. He was afraid of returning to the same shore unchanged. Her eyes lifted from the page. Ethan's jaw tightened, his gaze fixed on the floor as though that sentence had cut something open in him. Silence filled the space heavier than sound. Amelia closed the book gently. "That's enough," she said, her voice softer now. He didn't look up right away. His hand rested against his mouth, his breathing measured but strained. Finally, he whispered, "That's exactly it." She blinked. "What is?" His eyes lifted to hers, unguarded for the first time. "I keep building, bigger towers, bigger numbers, but when I come back to myself, I'm the same. Unchanged. Empty." The words shouldn't have startled her, but they did. Here was a man whose face belonged on the covers of business magazines, who commanded boardrooms and headlines, and he was confessing emptiness in a tiny midnight bookstore to a woman he didn't even know. Her instinct was to push away. This wasn't her burden. She didn't want to be drawn into his world, his strange vulnerability. And yet, she felt something stir, a recognition. Her life wasn't billions, but it was its own kind of emptiness. Shelves filled with words, a shop filled with silence, and her trying to keep alive what was already slipping through her fingers. "Why here?" she asked quietly. "Why me?" Ethan exhaled, shaking his head. "I don't know. I saw the light. And I thought, maybe the story would know me, even if no one else did." Her heart twisted, though she masked it with a sigh. Stories don't save people, she said, slipping the book back onto the counter. Don't they? His voice was gentle, not argumentative. Yours just did. The words lingered between them, fragile, dangerous. Amelia turned away, suddenly too aware of the late hour, the strange man in her shop, the way her pulse quickened. She busied herself rearranging a stack of books that didn't need rearranging. You should go, she said firmly, though her voice lacked conviction. Ethan stood slowly, as though reluctant to break the cocoon the bookstore had created. He looked around once more, then back at her. Thank you, he said, for giving me this. Amelia met his eyes briefly, then looked down. She didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. He moved toward the door, his steps soft against the worn wooden floor. For a moment, she thought he would leave without another word. But just before he opened the door, he turned back. Maybe one day, he said quietly, you'll let me tell you mine. The bell chimed as he left, the cold night air sweeping in after him. Amelia stood frozen, heart racing, staring at the door long after he was gone. The shop was silent again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It was charged, unsettled, as though the walls themselves had heard something sacred. She touched the book still warm from her hands, tracing the cracked spine, and whispered to the empty room, "What just happened?" The clock ticked past midnight. The bookstore, once simply a place of endings, now held the weight of something beginning. The snow had stopped by morning, leaving the city washed in pale light. Amelia unlocked the bookstore with a heaviness in her chest, trying to convince herself that last night was nothing more than a dream. Or at least, nothing worth holding on to. She dusted the counter, straightened the stacks of books, and told herself firmly, he was just a stranger. That's all. But as she traced her fingers over the spine of the novel she had read, her chest tightened. The words from the story echoed in her mind, the boy afraid of returning unchanged, and she hated how much they sounded like her own secret fears. The bell above the door jingled. For a wild second, her pulse leapt, expecting the tall figure in the tailored coat. But it was only Lily, her oldest friend. You look like you haven't slept, Lily said, dropping a paper bag on the counter. The smell of warm pastries filled the shop. Rough night. Amelia forced a smile. Just late closing. Lily raised a brow. Don't give me that. You've got that faraway look. What happened? Amelia hesitated, then shook her head. It's nothing. Just a customer. Her friend leaned in, smirking. A customer who kept you past midnight? Amelia's cheeks warmed. It's not like that. But Lily wasn't fooled. She unwrapped a croissant, tearing it in half. You've been hiding in this place for years, Amelia. If someone actually got you to talk, maybe it's worth noticing. Amelia bristled. Not everything is a sign, Lily. He was just lost. Still, she found herself glancing at the door every time the bell chimed that day, though Ethan never appeared. Across town, Ethan sat in a glass-walled conference room, the skyline glittering behind him. His team rattled through quarterly projections, graphs flashing across the screen. Royce Global is on track for record profits, his CFO droned. If we close the Singapore deal, our valuation could. But Ethan wasn't listening. His mind was still in the bookstore, hearing Amelia's voice carry the story, feeling the weight of a sentence that had cracked his armor. He pinched the bridge of his nose. "Excuse me," he said abruptly, standing before the presentation could end. His executives exchanged puzzled glances, but didn't dare question him. Out in the hallway, his assistant, Clara, intercepted him. "You've missed 2 investor calls this morning. And the media is requesting a statement about." "Cancel them," he said sharply. Clara blinked. "Cancel? Sir, these are." "I said cancel." His tone was colder than intended, but the idea of sitting through another hollow conversation made his chest ache. He stalked into his office, closing the door harder than he meant to. When the silence wrapped around him again, he dropped into his chair, running a hand through his hair. He told himself he didn't care, that he couldn't afford distractions. But his thoughts betrayed him, circling back to the glow of lamplight on worn pages, the steadiness of Amelia's voice. She doesn't even know who I am, he thought. For once, he was just a man in need, not a CEO. And that terrified him. That evening, Amelia closed the shop early, exhaustion weighing heavy. She lingered at the counter, half expecting, half dreading, that knock again. When it never came, she told herself it was for the best. The next morning, however, a delivery van pulled up. She frowned, checking the manifest. She hadn't ordered anything. 2 men carried in boxes, setting them on the floor. "Delivery for Amelia Hart," one said. When she opened them, her heart stumbled. Inside were books, rare, out-of-print editions she had only ever dreamed of stocking. Each had a small envelope tucked inside, bearing no signature, only a note, "For your shelves. Stories deserve to be found." Amelia's pulse raced. She didn't need a signature to know. Lily, who had stopped by again, gawked at the treasures. "Are you kidding me? Do you know what these are worth?" Amelia swallowed hard. "I didn't ask for this." Her friend grinned. "Maybe you didn't have to." But Amelia shook her head, pushing the boxes aside. "No, this isn't. I don't want to be anyone's charity case." Yet that night, as she reshelved the books, she couldn't resist opening one of the notes again. The handwriting was steady, almost elegant, but the words carried a weight she recognized: loneliness reaching for connection. Meanwhile, Ethan sat in his penthouse, staring at the city glittering below. He had sent the books anonymously, convinced it was the only way to give without frightening her away. Yet even as he poured himself a glass of scotch, he knew it wasn't enough. His phone buzzed. "Clara again. Sir, the board is demanding your presence. The shareholders are restless. They think you're distracted." "Maybe I am," he muttered. "Ethan," her voice softened, rare for her. "You've worked your whole life for this. Don't throw it away because of whatever this is." But the silence that followed wasn't agreement. It was the hollow ache of a man realizing that everything he'd built had left him starving for something else. By the end of the week, Amelia was no closer to clarity. The bookstore was fuller now, the shelves richer than ever, but her heart was a storm. She told herself to resist, to build walls. She didn't know this man. She didn't trust his world. And yet, she couldn't stop rereading that line, "Maybe one day, you'll let me tell you mine." She locked the store one evening, staring at the snowy street, and whispered to herself, "Stay away, Amelia. Stay safe." But deep down she already knew, resistance was only delaying the inevitable collision. The storm came without warning. By late afternoon, the city was swallowed by snow, flakes whipping sideways in fierce gusts. Amelia watched through the bookstore window as people hurried past, clutching coats tighter, disappearing into the white haze. The radio on the counter crackled with weather reports: roads closing, transit stalled, warnings not to travel unless absolutely necessary. She sighed, flipping the closed sign early. The storm meant no customers, no sales. Another reminder of how fragile her little world was. She was halfway through locking up when the bell above the door chimed. Her stomach clenched. Ethan Royce stood there, his dark coat flecked with snow, hair damp from the storm. His eyes carried an urgency that made her pulse stumble. "You shouldn't be out in this," she said before she could stop herself. "I had nowhere else to go," he admitted, brushing snow from his shoulders. "My driver couldn't get through. The streets are closed. And I saw your light." Amelia crossed her arms. "So you thought you'd wait out a blizzard in a bookstore?" His faint smile was almost sheepish. It seemed better than waiting it out alone. Her first instinct was to refuse, to protect her space from the whirlwind he brought with him. But the wind howled against the door, rattling the glass, and something in his eyes, earnest, unguarded, softened her resistance. "Fine," she said, turning the key again. "But only until the storm lets up." Hours passed, and the storm worsened. The city outside vanished into a blur of white. Inside, the bookstore glowed with lamplight, its warmth a fragile bubble against the chaos. Ethan moved carefully among the shelves, fingers brushing spines as though each book were a relic. Amelia busied herself behind the counter, pretending to ignore him, though her ears caught every quiet step he made. "You really love this place," he said finally, his voice breaking the silence. Amelia glanced up, defensive. "It's all I have left." He studied her, sensing layers she didn't want uncovered. "What do you mean?" She shook her head. "Doesn't matter." But he didn't press. Instead, He picked up a battered copy of Great Expectations and sank into one of the armchairs. I used to read this in college. Before life became something else. His voice carried a wistful note that surprised her. She had expected arrogance, not nostalgia. Against her will, she found herself moving closer, leaning against the counter near him. So what did it become? He looked up, meeting her gaze. For a moment, he seemed ready to tell her everything. But then his jaw tightened, the mask slipping back on. Complicated. The heater clanked, struggling against the cold. Amelia lit a candle on the counter, the flame flickering shadows across the shelves. She couldn't remember the last time someone had sat in that chair across from her this long. The silence between them wasn't empty, it pulsed with unsaid things. Finally, she asked, "Why the books? The ones you sent me?" Ethan froze, then set the novel down carefully. "You knew." "Of course I knew," she said softly. "Why would you do that?" His expression shifted, guilt and hope warring. "Because you deserve them. Because stories deserve to live, not die on forgotten shelves. And maybe, because I wanted to give you something I couldn't give myself." Her throat tightened. She hated the way his words pierced too close to truths she hadn't admitted aloud. She wanted to push him away, to tell him she didn't need saving. And yet, she couldn't deny the sincerity etched into every line of his face. The storm roared louder, shaking the windows. For a moment, Amelia thought the power might flicker out. The bookstore felt smaller, the air charged. "Look," she said, retreating toward the back room, "you can stay until the road's clear. But don't think this means anything." "I don't," he said quietly. But his eyes betrayed him. The hours stretched. Ethan wandered the aisles, reading blurbs, thumbing through volumes, while Amelia pretended to work on inventory. Yet she found herself stealing glances, noticing small things. The way he ran his hand through his hair when deep in thought, the way his lips curved when a line amused him, the way his shoulders finally seemed to loosen here, in this cramped little world of hers. He noticed her too, the way her voice softened when she muttered to herself, the way she lingered over certain books like old friends, the way her strength masked a weariness he recognized all too well. It was maddening. They didn't want this closeness, but the storm had trapped them, stitching their hours together whether they liked it or not. Around midnight, the wind slammed against the windows hard enough to rattle the glass. Amelia startled. Ethan rose instinctively, moving closer. "You should sit," he said gently. "You've been on your feet all day." "I don't need." But her knees wobbled, betraying her exhaustion. Without thinking, he guided her toward the armchair opposite his. His touch was careful, tentative, as though afraid she might break. She sat, heart pounding, every nerve screaming at her to maintain distance. And yet, as the storm howled around them, the bookstore became something else, not just her father's relic, not just her burden. It became a refuge. For both of them. Neither spoke for a long time. The only sound was the wind, the ticking clock, and the faint scratch of pages turning. Amelia finally whispered, almost to herself, "I don't understand why you're here." Ethan's reply was low, raw. "Because for the first time in years, I feel like I'm not alone." Her breath caught. She looked away, unwilling to meet his gaze, unwilling to admit the flicker of recognition burning in her chest. The storm had shown no mercy through the night. By dawn, snow pressed heavy against the shop windows, muting the city into stillness. Amelia stirred awake in the armchair, startled to find she had drifted off beneath a blanket she hadn't pulled over herself. Her eyes darted to Ethan. He sat in the opposite chair, coat draped over him, head tilted back against the rest. His chest rose and fell in the rhythm of sleep, but even in rest his brow furrowed, as though his dreams offered no peace. Amelia studied him longer than she meant to. The man in magazines always looked polished, unbreakable, untouchable. This man looked human. She rose quietly, padding toward the back room. But the floor creaked, and his eyes opened. For a moment, he looked disoriented, caught between worlds. Then recognition softened his gaze. "Morning," he murmured. "Morning," she echoed, suddenly self-conscious. He sat up, running a hand through his hair. "Sorry, I didn't mean to intrude on your space. I should have left when you fell asleep." "You couldn't," she said, gesturing to the window. Snow was piled high, the streets invisible. "We're trapped." A silence stretched between them, filled by the storm's muffled hush. Finally, Amelia crossed her arms. "You said last night this place makes you feel less alone." "Why?" Ethan exhaled, staring at the floorboards. "Because I grew up in rooms like this. My mother, she loved books. Every Saturday, she'd drag me to a shop like yours. She said stories were maps for the lost." Amelia blinked. She hadn't expected that. "But after she died," Ethan continued, his voice low, "my father made sure I had no time for such things. He believed books were weakness, distractions from building an empire. And I obeyed. I built. I won. I forgot." His throat tightened. "Until last week, when I went to the old street where her bookstore used to be. It was gone. Torn down for a parking lot." He swallowed hard, his hands clenched. "That's when I realized I couldn't even remember her favorite story. The one she read me every night. That's what I wanted when I came here, Amelia. One last story, to feel like a son again, not just a CEO." Amelia's breath caught. She hadn't expected vulnerability to pour from him so raw. Her instinct was to protect herself, to scoff, to say she didn't have time for billionaires chasing ghosts. But something in his voice cracked her armor. She sat down across from him, her own heart thudding. "My father loved books too," she said quietly. "He believed stories could keep people alive. That's why he built this place. When he got sick, he'd sit right there in that chair," she nodded toward the one Ethan had slept in, "and he'd tell me to promise I'd never let the shop close. He said stories deserved to be heard, not hidden." Her hands tightened around her arms. "And I promised. But promises don't pay the rent. I've been drowning in bills, pretending this place still matters when really, I think I'm just too afraid to let go. If I lose the shop, I lose him." The words left her throat like glass. She had never admitted them aloud, not even to Lily. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes steady. "So you hold on to stories because they keep him close. And I came to stories because I needed to feel close to her." Their gazes locked, and for a moment, it was unbearable. Two lives colliding in their grief, their loneliness, their stubborn need to cling to ghosts. Amelia broke first, looking away. "Don't make it sound like we're the same." "Maybe we're not," Ethan said softly. "But maybe that's why we found each other." The words unsettled her. She rose abruptly, needing space. She busied herself rearranging books that were already straight, anything to keep her hands moving. "You'll be gone when the storm clears. Back to your towers, your deals. And I'll still be here, trying not to drown." His voice followed her, calm but firm. "Unless you let me stay." Her hands froze on the shelf. She turned slowly, eyes narrowing. "What's that supposed to mean?" Ethan stood, his tall frame filling the aisle. "I don't mean moving in, Amelia. I mean being in your story. Not as a savior, not as a billionaire with solutions. Just as a man who doesn't want to be alone anymore." Her chest ached with the weight of the choice pressing at her. It was too much, too soon. She shook her head, whispering, "I can't." The silence stretched. Ethan didn't push further. He only nodded, a shadow passing through his eyes. "Then at least let me help with the storm." He grabbed a broom, sweeping snow from the doorway with quiet determination. Amelia watched him from behind the counter, torn between anger and longing, suspicion and recognition. She whispered to herself, "What are you doing to me?" By the second day, the storm still raged, and the bookstore had become its own little world. The city outside might as well have vanished. All that existed was paper, firelight, and two people circling each other in ways neither had planned. Amelia made tea from an old tin in the back room, pouring the steaming liquid into chipped mugs. When she returned, Ethan was crouched on the floor by the children's section, staring at a copy of Where the Wild Things Are. "You're not seriously reading that," she teased, setting his mug on the counter. He glanced up with a smirk. "Why not? Maybe I identify with the monsters." It startled a laugh from her, quick, unguarded, slipping out before she could stop it. She covered her mouth, cheeks flushing. "You don't exactly scream wild thing." His smirk widened. "You've never seen me in a board meeting." The banter settled into the air like warmth, easing the tension. For the first time since he walked into her life, Amelia felt the edges of her guard soften. Later that afternoon, as the storm rattled the windows, they sat cross-legged on the floor with books stacked between them. Ethan had insisted on helping her reorganize the shelves, though his attempts were questionable. "Romance next to history?" she asked, raising a brow at his haphazard pile. "Why not?" he replied, grinning. "Some of the greatest wars were started because of love." She rolled her eyes but couldn't stop the smile tugging her lips. "You're hopeless." "Hopelessly efficient," he corrected, holding up a stack. The movement sent one book tumbling onto the floor. When he bent to pick it up, their hands brushed. The contact was brief, accidental, but electric. Amelia pulled back quickly, heart racing. Ethan's gaze lingered a fraction too long before he looked away. Silence fell, not awkward but charged. Both returned to their task, though neither could shake the heat of that small spark. As evening settled, Amelia lit another candle and pulled her father's old record player from the back. The crackle of vinyl filled the store, soft jazz curling into the corners of the room. Ethan leaned against a shelf, watching her gently set the needle. "You surprise me," he said quietly. She raised a brow. "How so?" "You carry so much weight, but when you move like this, it's like you're lighter. Like the music remembers for you." The words struck her. She turned away, pretending to fuss with the volume. "Don't read into me," she muttered. But his gaze didn't waver. Finally, she sank into the armchair opposite his. "Tell me something," she said. "Something real. Not about deals or profits. About you." Ethan hesitated, jaw tight. Then with a deep breath he said, "When I was 16, my father locked me in his office for 2 days with nothing but contracts. He said if I could understand them, I'd inherit the company one day. If not, I'd inherit nothing." Amelia's eyes widened. "That's cruel." His laugh was bitter. "It was effective. I passed the test. But I lost something else. After that, I stopped drawing." "Drawing?" He nodded, his expression softening with memory. "Sketches. Architecture, mostly. I wanted to design buildings, not own them. But my father said artists starve. CEOs don't." Her heart ached. She imagined a boy trapped in a cold office, trading dreams for signatures. "Do you ever draw now?" His gaze dropped to his hands. "Not since she died. My mother. She was the only one who encouraged me." Amelia swallowed hard. The rawness in his voice was undeniable. "Maybe you should start again." He looked up, meeting her eyes. For once, he didn't deflect. "Maybe." The storm outside roared, but inside, time slowed. They shared more stories, Amelia's childhood summers helping her father alphabetize the shelves, Ethan's memories of sneaking out of prep school to sketch city skylines. At one point, laughter bubbled out of both of them when Ethan mis-shelved an entire row upside down. "Artistic choice," he insisted, and she nearly doubled over. The sound filled the store, echoing off the walls like something alive again. For a while, it felt like the shop was no longer just Amelia's burden. It was a place where two lost souls could exist without performance, without judgment. As night deepened, the power flickered. The lights blinked out, leaving only candlelight and shadows. Amelia tensed, instinctively clutching the arm of her chair. Ethan's voice was steady in the dark. "Don't worry. I'm here." Something in the way he said it, not commanding, not arrogant, just certain, made her chest tighten. She whispered, "I don't want to lose this place. But I don't know if I'm strong enough to save it." Her voice cracked. She hadn't planned to confess, but the storm, the darkness, the quiet, it all pulled the words out of her. Ethan leaned forward, the candlelight painting his face in gold and shadow. "You're stronger than you think. You've been carrying this alone. Maybe you don't have to anymore." Her breath caught. The confession hovered, dangerous and tender. She wanted to believe him, to let herself lean into the possibility. But fear still clawed at her, warning her against surrender. The silence stretched, heavy with everything unsaid. Amelia finally whispered, almost too softly to hear, "Why does it feel like you're breaking me open?" Ethan's eyes searched hers, steady and unflinching. "Because maybe I'm breaking too." The storm eased by the third day, leaving behind a city buried in white silence. Snowplows carved narrow paths through the streets, and slowly, life crept back. Amelia stood at the window of the bookstore, watching the first figures appear outside, neighbors digging out cars, children tumbling into drifts. The world was waking up again, and with it, the spell of the storm seemed to break. Behind her, Ethan packed his coat. "You're leaving," she said flatly, not turning around. "I have to," he admitted. "The board is restless. I've already missed days of meetings." Her chest tightened, though she fought to keep her voice even. "Of course. You don't belong here anyway." He stepped closer. "Amelia." "Don't," she cut in, whirling around. Her arms folded tight across her chest. "Whatever this was, it doesn't last beyond these walls. You'll go back to your towers. I'll stay here with my shelves. That's the story." Ethan's jaw clenched. "You don't know that." "Don't I?" Her voice rose, sharper now. "You think dropping rare books on my doorstep changes my reality? That you can sweep in with charm and confessions and fix everything? That's not life, Ethan. That's pity dressed as generosity." The word hit him like a slap. His eyes hardened. "Is that what you think of me?" "I don't know what to think of you," she snapped. "Except that you'll leave, and I'll be foolish for ever believing you were different." The silence that followed was brutal. Ethan's face closed off, his walls slamming back into place. "Maybe you're right," he said coldly. "Maybe it was foolish." He turned, pulling on his coat with clipped motions. The bell above the door jingled as he left, the sound sharp as glass. Amelia stood frozen, heart pounding, her body trembling from more than cold. She told herself this was what she wanted, to cut ties before they could hurt her. But the hollow ache spreading through her chest betrayed her. That evening, Lily stormed into the shop, waving her phone. "Care to explain why your midnight mystery man is plastered all over the news?" Amelia frowned, snatching the phone. On the screen flashed a headline: "Billionaire Ethan Royce missing key meetings amid rumors of distraction." Beneath it, a photo: Ethan leaving her bookstore that morning, snow swirling around him, reporters' captions speculating about the unknown woman who had kept him away from his empire. Her stomach dropped. "No." "Yes," Lily said, crossing her arms. "Care to tell me why the world's most eligible CEO was holed up in your shop during a blizzard?" Amelia shook her head, panic rising. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't know who he was until," she broke off, voice cracking. The truth hit hard. She had let herself believe he was just a man who needed stories, not a figure whose life was headlines and stock prices. And now, her quiet little bookstore had become collateral. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan sat in his office, the skyline glittering behind him. Reporters camped outside the building, shareholders buzzing with fury. Clara, his assistant, paced. "You've created a scandal," she said sharply. "Investors think you've lost focus. They're calling for a vote to strip you of authority." Ethan's shoulders sagged. "Let them." Clara froze. "Let them?" "Ethan, this company is your life." "No." His voice was low, but firm. "It's my prison." Clara stared at him, stunned. But he wasn't looking at her. He was staring at a sketchpad on his desk, one he had pulled out that morning, lines of an unfinished building scrawled across the page. For the first time in years, he had drawn. And it had been because of her. But Amelia's words still echoed like a wound, pity dressed as generosity. If that's how she saw him, what right did he have to want more? The bookstore felt different that night. The shelves loomed heavier, the air colder. Amelia tried to distract herself with work, but every sound reminded her of him, the way his laugh had filled the aisles, the way his voice had steadied her in the dark. She reached for the book she'd read to him that first night, flipping to the line that had broken them both. The boy realized he wasn't afraid of the ocean, he was afraid of returning unchanged. Her throat tightened. She closed the book with a thud, tears burning. And then the worst blow came. A letter slid under her door, delivered by courier. She unfolded it with trembling hands. Notice of eviction. Her landlord was selling the building. The bookstore would be gone within a month. Amelia collapsed into the armchair, the paper crumpling in her grip. For the first time, she allowed herself to break, sobs racking her body. She had fought so hard, held on so long, and still, she was losing. Her father's legacy, her promise, her home. Through her tears, she whispered into the silence, I can't do this alone. But Ethan was gone. That night, both of them sat in separate rooms, Amelia in her empty bookstore, Ethan in his glass tower, surrounded by symbols of what they'd built and what they stood to lose. And for the first time since the storm began, both wondered if they had just destroyed the only thing that could have saved them. The bookstore felt like a mausoleum. Amelia sat on the floor surrounded by books, eviction notice still clutched in her trembling hand. The shelves towered above her like silent witnesses, holding the weight of her father's memory. She wanted to scream, to beg the walls not to abandon her too. Instead, she whispered into the stillness, "I'm sorry, Dad. I tried." But even as the words left her, something inside rebelled. Her father had never been one to surrender quietly. He'd faced his illness with stubborn defiance, insisting that stories lived as long as someone was willing to tell them. Amelia wiped her eyes, staring at the cracked spine of the book she had read to Ethan. The words burned back into her memory, afraid of returning unchanged. She realized with a start that she was unchanged, trapped in fear, refusing to open herself to anything beyond this shop. She had pushed Ethan away because it was safer than believing he could mean more. And in that moment, she knew, safety was a lie. Across town, Ethan stood before the board of Royce Global, their polished shoes tapping impatience against the mahogany floor. "You've been distracted," one shareholder barked. "Our numbers are slipping, our reputation is bleeding. If you can't commit, step aside." Clara sat stiff beside him, her eyes warning him to fight back. But Ethan didn't raise his voice, didn't launch into his usual defense. He simply stared at the long table, the endless contracts, the walls closing in. And for the first time in his life, he said quietly, "Maybe I should." The room erupted, voices overlapping, outrage sparking. Clara gripped his arm as they left. "Ethan, what are you doing? You'll lose everything." "No," he said, stepping into the hall, voice steadier now. "For the first time, I might finally find something." He walked into his office, pulling the sketchpad from his drawer. The unfinished drawing stared back at him, lines of a building that could have been, the dream of a boy who once wanted to create, not just control. His mother's words echoed, "Stories are maps for the lost." He realized Amelia had been his map. And he had walked away. That night, the city thawed slowly, streetlights glowing against melting snow. Both Amelia and Ethan sat alone, haunted by silence, wrestling with the same question: do I risk it? Do I dare? Amelia imagined her father's voice, "Don't be afraid to turn the page." Ethan imagined his mother's hand guiding his across paper, "Draw the life you want, not the one you're told to live." The choice pressed in on them, heavy, relentless. Amelia rose from the floor, clutching the eviction notice. "I can't lose both him and this place," she whispered. "Not without fighting." For the first time in years, she felt resolve spark in her chest. She would not vanish quietly. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through news articles until she found his name again, his address printed in some glossy magazine profile. Her hands trembled, but she steadied them. "Maybe it's time to hear his story," she said. Meanwhile, Ethan grabbed his coat, sketchpad tucked under his arm. Clara intercepted him at the elevator. "Where are you going?" she asked, exasperated. He looked at her, a small smile breaking through. "To tell someone the truth." The doors closed before she could protest. Two people moved through the night, Amelia from her bookstore, Ethan from his tower, each propelled by the same fragile hope, each unaware the other had already made the same choice. The city hummed with possibility as their paths drew closer, hearts pounding with the risk of what lay ahead. When life gives you a choice, fear or love, silence or confession, what would you choose? Keep watching, because the answer can change everything. Snow still clung to the streets in fragile patches as Amelia hurried through the city, her coat wrapped tight, her heart hammering harder than her footsteps. She clutched the eviction notice in one hand and her father's favorite book in the other. If she lost the shop, if she lost Ethan, at least she would not lose the chance to tell him what he had become to her. She reached the glass tower of Royce Global, its gleaming lobby intimidating as always. The receptionist blinked at her, recognizing her face from tabloids. "Miss Hart." Amelia flushed. I need to see him." Before the receptionist could respond, the elevator doors opened, and Ethan stepped out. He froze at the sight of her, as though he had conjured her from his own desperate wish. The sketchpad was still in his hand, clutched like a lifeline. Amelia. His voice cracked with relief, disbelief. She swallowed hard. I was coming to find you. I was on my way to you, he said, his breath unsteady. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath with them. Then, slowly, Amelia lifted the eviction notice, her hands trembling. They're selling the building. The bookstore, my father's bookstore, it's going to be gone. Ethan's face fell, grief washing over his features. He reached for her, but stopped short, hesitation tightening his jaw. Amelia. I don't want to overstep. Not again. But if you'll let me, I can help. She shook her head quickly, tears welling. This isn't about money, Ethan. I can't let you buy my life like a transaction. I just don't want to face it alone. Her words shattered something in him. His hand, still hovering, finally found hers. He gripped it firmly, grounding her. Then you won't. Not ever again. They sat together on a bench outside the tower, snowflakes melting into their coats. For the first time, they spoke without defenses. Ethan opened his sketchpad, flipping to the half-finished building. This is what I used to dream of, he admitted. A place for people to belong. Not an empire. A sanctuary. But I gave it up because my father convinced me it was foolish. He looked at her, eyes raw. Then you reminded me that stories matter. That dreams matter. Amelia's throat tightened. She opened her book, fingers brushing the worn pages. My father believed the same thing. That every story kept someone alive. I promised him I'd keep the bookstore open, but maybe I've been holding on out of fear instead of love. Then let's build something new, Ethan said softly. Not as CEO and shopkeeper. As two people who know what it is to lose, and who finally want to choose each other. Her breath caught. What are you saying? He smiled faintly, tentative but true. I'm saying I don't want to run an empire anymore. I want to draw again. I want to read again. I want to live. And I want to live it with you. The honesty in his voice undid her. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she laughed through them, shaky but real. You're ridiculous, she whispered. You're reckless. And you're exactly what I needed. He cupped her face gently, thumb brushing her tears. So are you. Then finally he kissed her, soft, unhurried, a promise written in warmth. The city hummed around them, but for Amelia, the world narrowed to the press of his lips, the steadiness of his touch, the unshakable truth that she was no longer alone. Weeks later, the bookstore bustled in ways Amelia had not seen in years. Not because Ethan had thrown money at it, but because together, they had reimagined it. Half shop, half community space, shelves of books alongside tables for children to draw, adults to write, neighbors to gather. Ethan's sketches lined one wall, transformed into murals by local artists. A plaque near the entrance read, "For Evelyn and Daniel. Who taught us stories are maps for the lost." Amelia watched as a child sat cross-legged on the floor, devouring a book, while his mother sipped coffee nearby. The sound of pages turning, of laughter echoing, of life filling the once empty aisles, it was everything she had dreamed. Ethan slipped behind her, arms encircling her waist. "Looks like your father was right," he murmured. She leaned into him, smiling softly. "And your mother too." He kissed her temple. "Funny. They led us here, didn't they?" "To each other," Amelia whispered. That night, after the shop closed, Ethan pulled the first book she had ever read to him from the shelf. He opened it in the firelight, his voice steady as he began to read aloud. Amelia curled against him, her heart full. The line returned. The boy realized he wasn't afraid of the ocean. He was afraid of returning unchanged. Amelia smiled through tears, closing her eyes. Because now, neither of them had to return unchanged. They had chosen to leap, together. When love finds you in the unlikeliest of places, even at midnight in a closing bookstore, don't turn away. Because sometimes, the last story isn't an ending at all. It's the beginning. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. If it touched your heart, then you're going to absolutely love the next one. It's even more surprising, more emotional, and full of twists you won't see coming. So don't wait. Click on the video showing on your screen right now and continue the journey with me. I promise, you won't regret it.